Welcome back to Female Founder Stories, Women at the Top Told by a Teen. I'm Sia Kantaria, and I'm taking you behind the scenes of entrepreneurship, hearing about the grit, the setbacks, and the breakthroughs it takes to build something real, told in a way that makes you think, I could do that too. Most teenagers hear words like inflation, recession, interest rates, and elections constantly, but very few people actually understand how deeply politics and financial markets shape everyday life. And today's guest has built her career decoding exactly that. Helen Thomas studied PPE at Oxford before working across banking, hedge funds, and government during the financial crisis. She later founded Blonde Money, a macroeconomic consultancy that helps investors and businesses understand how global politics, economics, and world events impact financial markets. So in simple terms, when the world changes, her job is to understand what happens next. But what makes Helen especially interesting isn't just her career in finance, but also her perspective on ambition, confidence, and why learning to stop being overly agreeable completely changed the trajectory of her business. So welcome, Helen. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So you founded Blonde Money. Again, it's a consultancy focused on how politics and global events affect financial markets, which is especially relevant now with the elections, inflation, AI, and so much uncertainty. So for teenagers hearing all these headlines every day, what does Blonde Money actually do, and why is understanding markets becoming more important than ever?
Well, financial markets are where the world goes round, to be honest, because every second of every day, the price of something depends on all those possible future outcomes discounted down to today. So if you like, it's the place to find where all of politics and economics and the whole world and everything that's going on, it comes down to the one price of an asset. So that's why I love it, because it's literally the heart, the beating heart of the global economy. And I love your introduction, Sia. That was excellent, because I do think a lot of talk about this world is a bit jargon filled and maybe sounds a bit boring. And I would love everyone to know it is the exact opposite of boring. It is the most fascinating place, because the price of money determines almost everything else that goes on. So and that's why I founded my business, to try and explain, as you put it, what happens next. Because if you can figure that out, the price of money and what happens next, then you can be better equipped with whatever you want to do with your business, with your life, with your future.
And you were talking about how often I think finance and macroeconomics can feel very male dominated from the outside. And you were saying how it's not boring. And can you explain to us why you think more young women should consider careers in financial markets?
Yeah, I think everyone should consider it. I'm really quite surprised that more women don't. We take regular interns and we get a lot of applications, and I'm very keen to try to get that as balanced as possible, male, female, socioeconomic backgrounds, diversity of ethnicity, etc. But even then, it's noticeable that applicants, and this is from people who are starting university, maybe 18 years old, they still don't get as many applications from women. And I have asked some of my female interns why it is. And some of them say, look, actually, they just see the guys talking about crypto or the Wolf of Wall Street, and it seems to be just not a very interesting or appealing world. I think that may be part of it. In fact, you may have a better answer than me, Sia, as to why people aren't thinking of it. I can only say that it is just as exciting as being a doctor. You have to be just as investigative as a journalist. You have to be as professional as a lawyer. These are all jobs that actually are much more balanced these days. I think, in fact, quite often there are more women going into many of those professions on the balance. So I think perhaps it is just a cultural thing. When I started, certainly I was in the minority. I am still often in the minority when I go and speak to clients or conferences. I kind of, do you know what? I didn't really notice it until, so my partner in life is also my business partner, and he's worked in finance for a long time as well. And he was the one that noticed it. and he was saying, he said, I'm starting to see it through your eyes. This is quite different. The way that just as it would be if you had a dominance of one group, whatever their characteristic, if they dominate, then the other person who maybe hasn't got that is just going to come across differently. So I don't know. I don't know. As I said, I love doing this. So I'm so glad you asked me to do this, because there is zero reason that anyone from any background, however they identify, shouldn't come into this industry, because who wouldn't want to be where it's all happening, where the power and the interesting stuff happens. That's why I would, try and exhort people to consider finance and economics.
I think it's really interesting what you said about the kind of crypto and Wolf of Wall Street, because I think that's really true. One of my friends is he's looking at finance, and it seems from the outside as very mathsy, very kind of economic space. And I just don't, and maybe that's just the courses at university, but when you get out into the real world, it doesn't seem like it is. And it's so broad.
It is.
Like you were saying, like the kind of all the different professions, like the journalist, the lawyer, the doctors, you need skills from all of those different professions. So I think that's really interesting.
And don't let that put you off. Don't let this idea of like the Wolf of Wall Street put you off. I mean, the one thing you should watch, everybody should watch, because it's great education about finance and economics, is The Big Short, which was a book originally by Michael Lewis, and it was turned into this amazing film, and it explains a lot of concepts around the financial crisis very well. However, I watched it a few times. Then I realised I think there are 2 or 3 women characters in it. One is a stripper, one is Selena Gomez, one is Margot Robbie. The hedge fund managers making the money are all male. But I actually hadn't thought about it, because I'm watching it and I'm like, I want to be Michael Burry, who, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but he writes, $400 million on a whiteboard about how much money he manages, because he's cracked the puzzle and he's solved it. It's not just about the money, by the way. It's about like solving the puzzle. So it's interesting. Like, I guess just what, I don't know, like what, if you watch something, do you watch, I don't know, a medical drama and think, oh, I don't see many female doctors? I don't know. I'm not sure people do. I guess I just, as I say, try to say to people, become engaged, see if you find it interesting, and then just, why would anything stop you? Because it shouldn't.
I definitely think, having spoken to other founders and seeing it in my friends, that women are definitely kind of more underconfident. And I guess when you see a movie or whatever, a kind of sector that's very heavily male dominated, and you kind of don't have those role models, it's kind of difficult to envision yourself there or see yourself kind of surrounded by people who are just not really like you. And that kind of leads me on to another question about, you've talked about kind of stopping being overly agreeable completely changed your business and kind of your outlook. So I think that'd be really great for a lot of other women and teenagers to hear. So can you expand more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was my partner who spotted this. So I've done quite a bit of media over the years. I'm often on TV or radio to explain what's happening with interest rates, with the government, these sorts of things. And often you get quite a lot of pushback on the questions, as you should. And initially, so my business partner would watch me and he said, you're just being very agreeable, because you're not really adding to the analysis. You're kind of going, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I was like, oh yeah, I do that. Why do I do that? Now, question mark, I don't know the answer, but is it to do with a sort of cultural role for women? Is it a biological thing? I don't know. I don't want to make grand judgments here. But I certainly think that, wanting people to like you, making the room happy, pleasing the people around you, does seem to have been somewhat more of a trend that I would find in my female friends. So when he told me this, I thought, oh, okay, well, because he said it hands the power away from you and it kind of puts you in a subordinate position and you're not getting your point across. So the next one, I was like, right, I'm not going to be agreeable. And I kind of took it a bit too far. I was asked some questions and I was saying, no, that's wrong because of this reason. And I think I got like quite assertive. And at the end of it, my partner watched it. He said, okay, probably went a little bit too far because you were a little bit too aggressive, but you got your point across. And basically at that point forward, I sort of calibrated it. And I've now learned to say to somebody, no, I don't agree with you for these reasons. Do not fear that. There's nothing wrong with that. You're the one that's done the analysis. And it happens to me in meetings now. I went to a presentation for a bank at a breakfast. I was the only woman in the room. I put forward my thesis. Several people disagreed. And, they'll push back, right? So I say, no, my analysis is this. They say, no, your analysis is wrong. I don't agree with you. This part's wrong. And then you can say, okay, this point I think is the case because of the work I've done to show that is the most likely outcome. And then that person has to come back and say why they think it's not the most likely outcome. And quite often, they don't actually have a comeback to that. So it's about being disagreeably agreeable. Like, I don't want to be rude to that person. Mm-hmm. I don't want to expose them. I'm not trying to do it for that reason. I'm just trying to get my point across. And later on, after that breakfast, my analysis turned out to be right, and it was what happened. And that person did come back and say, oh, yeah, you were right about that. So believe in yourself and maybe even practice saying it in a room or to a mirror first, because I think for some of us, male or female, it doesn't come naturally to say, no, you're wrong, and I'm going to disagree for these reasons. You can do it very politely, but it is important.
I think a great way that teenagers, like my teenage audience, could practice that is in school. I think this kind of being disagreeing and saying no is a lot is very linked to intellectual curiosity. And in class, let's say you're told something by a teacher. I think one of the myths about I used to think this, we had a myth in geography that population is rapidly increasing and all this stuff, but actually population is decreasing in many areas. There are loads of government schemes to help increase population. And so challenging ideas such as that can really help you to put it in practice from a young age. And then that way it's a transferable skill when you're older in the financial sector.
Because it's not personal to disagree with somebody, and it's not confrontational to say no. You could make it confrontational, and I think maybe sometimes that's how it comes across. But I think, being polite but firm and confident in your analysis, as you've said, do the work, know the numbers, then you know. Like what you've just said to me, I'm like, okay, I get that. Sia knows what she's talking about.
And okay, so coming back to my teenage audience, if you were 17 again, or just a teenager again, and you're really ambitious but unsure of which path to take, what skills or habits would you develop first that you think have really helped you in your life or with your business?
This is tricky because we all have moments of self-doubt, and in fact the real acceptance in life is when you know that you don't know. So I often think about going through life as being on a boat, and you want to position your boat in a direction to go one way. Like you've had a think, your passion, your interest, you want to go in this direction. And then accepting that although your boat has set off and you've made it as strong and sturdy boat as possible, you've done all your work, you've got your qualifications, you've learned about your field, there will be a wave that comes along. There will be a storm that comes along. So how do you make sure the boat is resilient? And accepting the fact that you're not going to go in a straight line and get there immediately. I mean, you might be extremely lucky. That does happen for some people. So it's sort of like knowing that future course, accepting it won't necessarily be easy, and then making sure that you are resilient. So how do you make sure that you're resilient? Well, I mean, lots of different strategies for that sort of thing. Depends on the kind of person you are. You might be a very physical person. You need to get your stress or your anxiety out on the playing fields for sport. You might journal. You might have a therapist. What would I say to my 17-year-old self? You know what? I was so confident at 17. I think actually at 17, I was more confident than I am now because I was so clear about my path. And I think that, and by the way, it didn't go the way I thought. Okay, when I was 17, I wanted to be prime minister, right? It's not panned out how I had planned. Whereas a guy that I was at university with, who you might have heard of, called Rishi Sunak, took a slightly different path. That's fine. It's the way you roll with it. I think actually one thing I will say this again. I don't want to generalize too much about women and our approach, but sometimes there's a sense that you have to have your ducks in a row, that you won't take the risk until you've achieved 3 or 4 steps, or that you haven't prepared certain things, or you need to study something or take a qualification or etc. don't worry so much about the ducks in a row, because it's hard to get all the ducks in a row. And also you might get them wrong and there might be like 3 other ducks over here. So that I think there is a slightly innate risk aversion / perfectionism. And in maybe in women, again, not all women and not all men, but I think I would tell my 17-year-old self, really don't be afraid of taking any risks. You've got nothing to lose, because you can count on yourself, because you know you can work hard, you'll get through it, and counting on yourself is the number one thing, really, that you believe in yourself. As people say, I know that sounds like the kind of thing you hear from everybody, but there are going to be plenty of times when you will doubt yourself and people will push you and push you around. So you have to repeat it more often than you think.
I think that's really great advice. And kind of speaking about resilience, has there been a moment in with Blonde Money where there's been a huge setback and you've kind of felt like, gosh, what do I do now? But you found a way to get around it?
All the time. One of the things about running your business is it really never pans out as you expect. And actually, it's almost 10 years I've been running this business. I'm still learning and I'm still dealing with the ups and the downs, being that, the boat on the seas getting thrown around. The first thing was, I think it really took a year to get my first client. And then a year after that, I lost them. And I was like, oh my goodness me, I put so much work into this. And, I knew it'd be hard, but you feel like it's 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen? But of course, what happened in that 2-year period was your name gets out there, the marketing goes up, you're producing, you're connecting. The world, these waves I'm talking about, okay, maybe there's been some difficult ones, but sometimes the good ones come back. So it's kind of like keeping going, keep at it is the number one thing. And honestly, that sounds again like the most stupidly simple advice, but keep doing what you're doing and do it. It's like writing a book. You hear all the time about these authors who churn out these books. They get up, they write 4 hours every day. And sometimes they rip it up and throw it in the bin. Sometimes it's 3 months of work and it's terrible and they throw it out. But they kept doing it, they kept turning up. And it's that hard grind that is so important. And you can do marketing courses about this. There's funny things now. I've been writing a column for City AM for a year. And I still see people, I've known for a while in my network. And they're like, oh, I saw you in City AM. You just started doing that. I'm like, I've done 52 articles. And that's fine. Why should they? Whatever. It's not like they need to pay attention to what I'm doing, but it just shows you this point that you got to keep at it, keep being in people's faces. There is this proverb, if you like, that, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So you can't control the opportunity, but you can control the preparation. And that's what you need to work on. Not worry too much about the outcomes, much more about doing the work.
I really like kind of the idea of throwing yourself into uncomfortable situations. And I think as well with keeping on showing up, I think that's also really relevant to kind of anyone taking exams right now, it's a lot about, nobody likes revising after a certain point because it just gets boring, but you just got to keep on doing it. And I think it's kind of learning to sit with boredom almost and keeping on, keeping on going and doing hard work ends up in good results.
The truth about revision and schoolwork, and as you go to university and any other work you do, is it's a bit like running or any kind of exercise. There's a base amount that you build simply by going through the notes, making the notes, doing the practice exam, just like it would be if you don't want to do a 5K run every day, but you go out and do 2K or something. It's something. You're kind of putting it in the bank. You're building on it. And you'd be amazed. I remember, the worst exams I ever did, the hardest, the most stressful thing I ever did was my finals exams at Oxford. I can tell you now, they are still the hardest thing I've ever done. That was, 25 years ago, and I can still remember doing those exams. I can remember how it felt. But I will tell you this, I also know, so those 8 exams, that's all that your whole grade depends upon just those 8 exams at the end of the 3 years. There was a point about 5 exams in where it would just flowed. You're just in the zone. It's like you've done the work, you've done the prep, it comes out of you, and that was great. Now by the 8th exam, I was like exhausted and I felt terrible. But I look back now and I think, actually, that moment when I took that final exam, I was probably the most I was probably the most intellectually capable person I'll ever have been in my life. So in some respects, I'm like, wow, that was horrible, but it was amazing to go through it. I couldn't write like that now, even though 25 years later. So I'm sort of trying to tell you, there's a very strange situation when you do exams, particularly under the pressure of how you're doing them and all that revision, where you're going to actually be the best version of yourself on one of those exam days. And have faith in that, because if you've done the work, you will be.
Yeah, definitely. I always think hard work pays off, even in ways that you don't expect. Often in ways you don't expect, exactly like your boat analogy. And okay, this is a bit of a random question, but you obviously have like a co-business partner, and I know you kind of spoke about it being a great kind of journey and whatever. But have you noticed any kind of discrimination because you're a woman compared to your partner?
Well, it was funny. We once went the business it started by me, and it was me on my own for probably the first 4 years or so. I remember going to a conference with my partner, and we were going around introducing ourselves to people, and they asked him, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm the eye candy," which was actually quite funny at the time. But he was doing it to kind of challenge, right? Because he is a white middle-aged man that looks like all the other people at the conference, trying to be like, yeah, well, you're meeting us together. Don't default to, oh, he's the CEO, because it does. And the thing is, it does happen to all of us. Unfortunately, we all have biases. We all got to check our biases. I could walk into a room and mistake somebody for the assistant when they're the CEO. Honestly, it could. It could happen to all of us. So I think probably the discrimination sometimes is that sense of, I think sometimes people underestimate female-founded businesses. And I hate to say this because I don't want to perpetuate it. I think sometimes it's like, like a wealthy man is backing you somewhere, like you haven't done it on your own. And all I would say about that is, first of all, the more female-founded businesses we have, the more that will just disappear as a bias because of what people have seen in the past. And secondly, as soon as you stand up at that conference or in a meeting and make the pitch, within 30 seconds, they know it's nonsense if you are the genuine deal, which you would be, and I'm sure everyone listening to this would be. Because it just... They're not thinking about that. They're like, oh, what are you telling me? Oh, this is interesting. This is relevant for my business. Oh, yeah, I need to know about this. I want to see more of your product. And you just get straight into it. So I do think there is like that initial, probably, what's the word? It's like a first impression. In fact, it was partly why I called the business Blonde Money, because I'm trying to challenge people's prejudgments. So, the idea of blonde about money what would they know? They'd be stupid. And then to be able to come out with just the hardest, most detailed analysis to predict political and economic outcomes, it's like, oh, maybe we misjudged this person. Maybe they do know what they're talking about, because I think I've been misjudged my whole life. I mean, I've got to tell you, Sia, I do have a little thing of like hoping and, no, it's not hoping, it's true, because I know it happens. Sort of the idea that, I started life on a trading floor with loads, it was like 4 women and 40 men in my foreign exchange trading team at Merrill Lynch, this investment bank. And, I worked in these very male-dominated environments. And the idea now that a man will turn to another man and be like, did you hear what Blonde Money said? They said, Ed Miliband's the next chancellor. And it's all totally serious and sensible, and they know it's proper analysis. I'm like, yes, that's where I wanted to get to. But it's taken a long time to get there.
I definitely think that we need more women just as founders and in general. And I know that women are heavily underfunded as well. So
they are, which is totally nuts. totally nuts. But we need more women to start businesses. Do you know this thing about, so I'd love, by the way, I would love it if somebody could do some analysis on risk-taking behavior between men and women, because I would just genuinely be interested if there is a gender difference, because here is the statistical facts. If you have a probability distribution of people and there are a group of people that take more risk, then you're probably going to get more big hitters who make like big wins, but you're going to have more big losers, more bankruptcies, but you'll only remember the big ones who do really well. Now, if women are slightly more risk averse, then we are kind of narrowing our path of possible outcomes. So just on a purely statistical basis, that may well be why there are the men who run the $1 trillion companies and, not more women doing that. And then when you talk about founders and raising funding, then if the people doing the funding are just not used to a woman or maybe a woman's approach, then it might be purely statistical. They might be like, well, I put money behind Mark Zuckerberg and look what I got out.
That's true. I know that for a fact that like women and men applying for the same job, I think it's like men, if they have okay, this is not exactly the right statistic, but if they have 5 out of 10 of the kind of criteria, they'll apply for it. Whereas unless women have 8 or 9 out of 10, only then they'll apply for it. So I guess that's kind of linking to
that's
risk.
When I was talking about ducks in a row. Don't worry about the ducks in a row. Do not worry about the ducks in a row. That may well be our own unconscious bias that we have to feed back into our brains, right? You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to have 10 out of 10. You know what? 5 out of 10, go for it. What is wrong with not getting it? What is wrong with failure, in inverted commas? That's maybe something we all have to become a bit more aware of.
And speaking of failure, my last question, which I ask all the founders who come on my podcast, is what is your kind of definition of success, or kind of what does success look for you, look like to you now?
That is a question that 5 years of therapy and 20 years of working took me to get to any kind of answer about. Okay, so for me, and I think it is very different for different people, but for me, success is both the respect of my peers and my pride in a job well done. That's it, really, in terms of professional success. In terms of other success, it's having, the people you love around you and spending time with them, because I think that's important too. But that's just my approach. It may be different things to different people. If you are, one thing I will say, look, goodness me, I went to a private girls' school in Oxford. I did PPE at Oxford. I went to work in investment banking at the age of 20. I was moved up a year at school, so I finished university early. I was pretty I told you I wanted to be Prime Minister, pretty obsessed with high achievements. And one of the hardest things about the world of finance was the bonus system is tricky, because then you start to compare yourself with other people, because you start to see it like getting an A star or whatever the top grade is these days. 45 out of 45 is it in the IB. And, you would think, oh, got that team, that person got a massive bonus. Or a few years after you start work, you see the people who become managing directors and, you're making loads of money. And it got me, I got really wound up about that. I got really upset about that. And now I look back and think, well, that wasn't really what mattered to me. I was just using that as the metric because that happened to be the metric. But measuring yourself in money like that against one another, for me, that was not a path to contentment. And nor is it, I think, really, I don't really think money on its own is a measure of success. I'm not, let's not be stupid. There are things that are great about money and there are things that are great about success. But I guess what I'm trying to say is don't beat yourself up about that. Think about what it means for you. And you may not know, and it may change, and that's fine.
They say comparison is the thief of joy. So I 100% agree with you. And
I
also
heard that. I love that, Sia.
Really?
Yeah.
And also all the founders I've spoken to have completely different kind of versions of success. So it's really interesting to hear each time. And also, I also think that, when you said that you were kind of comparing yourself with like the bonuses and stuff like that, well, at the same time, you were breaking stereotypes and you're being a role model to the rest of us who are looking for kind of women. Like, this is kind of the reason I started my podcast, to get, for people to see female founders and see kind of the journey behind it and understand that female founders, they're like in the portion, they were kind of set up kind of almost not to do well. They're underfunded, all these different things, and they're still doing like amazingly. And so I think, that's absolutely incredible that you're out here breaking stereotypes. I love that.
Well, Sia, you're to be applauded for doing this podcast, because that is what we need to see. And I want to say one thing before we finish, by the way, because it's important. But again, this isn't meant to be aggressive. This is me being agreeably disagreeable. But don't be a victim. Don't think like a victim, or you will be a victim. What I mean by that is accept that, yes, there may be discrimination. But you know what? If you're the kind of hardworking person who's got what it takes to succeed in industry and founding your own business, then you'll get there anyway. I guess what I'm saying is there will be that boat on the waves, right? You don't set out on that journey going, oh, what if we don't come back? Oh, what if it's really hard? Oh my God, what if we all die and we don't have enough food? That's not a useful mindset. The mindset is, I'm going for it. I know it might be hard. I'll work on whatever I can do to my boat. But do you get what I mean? I mean, a victim mindset definitely is not helpful. So we should accept that there may be there may well be extra hurdles to overcome, but then it is about working hard and acknowledging that you've got that capability to do so, which I'm pretty sure everyone listening to this podcast will.
Yeah. So to sum up, the highlights from this podcast for me have been talking about resilience, your journey, and being disagreeably agreeable.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
No, agreeably disagreeable.
Agreeably disagreeable, the other way around.
There you go.
Keep challenging conversations, things that you're told. Keep being, hardworking, because you will get there in the end. And like the boat analogy, there are ups and downs, but you get there in the end. And Helen showed us exactly that. So thank you so much. You are incredible. And to everyone listening, see you next time.
Thank you.